All right, we're beginning this vlog, podcast, whatever you want to call it. I think podcasts are like streamed in real time, aren't they?
I'm not sure. I think a podcast is acceptable if there's a discussion. I don't know.
Okay, we'll call it a podcast or a vlogcast. There's no video
a vlog,
though.
Probably. I don't know.
It exists in some kind of void. Anyway, got my friend Jake here.
Thank you.
You want me to shout out your channel? What is your channel's name?
Yeah. Okay. So you can check me out at LoreMaster Jack on YouTube. I have only a couple of game videos posted, and I look to be making more content soon. True to my name, I do want to explore lore of some other stuff. Anything that catches my interest, I wanted to catch yours too. But for right now, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite universes, that being Warhammer 40k, which is Noel's specialty.
Yep, and of course I'm from Thrift E Gaming. We're probably going to put this video up on both of our both of our channels. So we were just going to kick off today's discussion with Fate of Konor, the most recent campaign 40k has had. Chaos vs. Imperium. Imperium won.
Surprise.
Well, I mean, look at what happened with Eye of Terror. Of course, that was a long time ago. But Imperium won pretty solidly. They're calling it
overwhelmingly.
Yeah, well, in the writing, Games Workshop's writing of the fluff, they're calling it like a close victory. They won 4 out of 6 worlds that they were fighting over there. One thing that I thought was kind of interesting is how they structured it with, if I'm remembering correctly, they did each world, in stages. It wasn't where you could report wherever you wanted to, like Eye of Terror, which is what caused Chaos to win in Eye of Terror.
Maybe. Yeah.
So I think they kind of organized it a little more so that it was a little more controllable by them.
Yeah, I mean, if we were to compare the two, strategically speaking, Konor's a little brain dead. It just sort of happened, sequentially in the order that Games Workshop said it was going to happen. And for what it's worth, I do feel that Games Workshop did a really cool job hyping up the campaign when it was running and giving us a little bit of lore updates, like that one world that fell, the Nurgle, that was a communications hub. They said that when that fell to Chaos, that it became a beacon for warp
Demons,
entities.
yeah.
Instead of us calling for help like we probably needed to in the Imperium.
Yeah, I do think that was kind of cool. They had each world represented, did a certain thing, and so when they fell, they had kind of consequences that way. And I think that's why they called it a moderate win for the Imperium, because they lost an Aggr world and they lost a communications world, so those causing problems for them. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I do think they made this one a little more controllable, a little less chaotic, if you will, like the Eye of Terror was. Nice. Yeah, the Eye of Terror was a great campaign, but they kind of screwed it up because they didn't count on what they would do, plan on what they would do if Chaos won, which what they really should have done is, I think this is what Magic the Gathering and some other games have done, where they write 2 endings before the campaign starts. Yeah. And so they have it planned out, and I don't think Games Workshop did that with Eye of Terror, which was that was one of my favorite points in being involved in the hobby, actually. But this is kind of a callback to that, which is cool, but they definitely did it a little differently. I'm sure they in this case, hopefully they did do that, have the 2 endings where if Chaos won, they had something planned too. But Imperium won, they have the most players.
That's actually something I wanted to bring up, is that Warhammer is an amazing setting, and 40k is super nice because it's kind of dialed up to 11, but you see, the problem there is that once you get to 11, there's not a lot more you can escalate. You're going to start making numbers up at that point, and it doesn't really make any sense how the volume could be
That's
that high.
That's when the Primarchs come back. Also, Primaris Marines.
Yeah.
Primaris Marines are the epitome of, we're already at 11, well, let's crank it up even higher. And
I sort of feel like it's not a bad idea what Games Workshop's trying to do. I think they want us to become more involved. I think they want to grow the hobby, which is good because, in the past, it was questionable how important that actually was to Games Workshop as opposed to just,
Well, that's what players were wanting for forever, and finally they're doing it. So even if, I don't necessarily am not crazy about a lot of the new fluff, I do appreciate what they're doing in a lot of these efforts, finally making a Gene Stealers army, finally making an Adeptus Mechanicus army.
Yes.
It's
used for praise on Messiah.
doing things that people have been wanting for a long time. They've been doing, and now they just did a campaign where the players' battles were reported and mattered. So, you know, they're doing a lot of these things that people have been wanting for a long time. So I appreciate that. Definitely.
And no one can fault Games Workshop for trying to meet the players in the middle. It's just a little
because before they weren't doing that at all.
Yeah.
So it's an improvement, certainly.
But, you know, like, we can't just, like, you know, even if Games Workshop is making tenebrous steps in the right direction, we can't exactly, you know, excuse them for every little mistake they make. I do think that,
well, some of it is subjective. Some of it is our opinion, you know, whether it's a mistake or not. I know there's some people that like... I'm sure there's some people that like the new fluff and stuff, and some people that like things, but, you know...
I do think that...
we can criticize still.
Yeah, well, on that criticism point, I will say that I feel like Imperium has a lot more players than Chaos, like, probably across the board, and
just because they have so many more armies,
right? And they came out in spades in this campaign, and, like, you know, I almost wonder if, like, maybe it should be, like, done by, you know, like, balanced for sample size or something. Like, you know, I don't know. We're really kind of dealing with a hobby that is a really unique world that exists in a lot of space that is hard to capture. You know what I mean? Like, outside of the books, I think it's really hard to do 40k justice, even in the hobby. And that's why a lot of concern is being raised about advancing the plot. Now, I'm not against advancing the plot, but I am concerned that 40k has, like, really good writers and really bad writers, and you know, you kind of have to pull the slot machine and see what you get. And I'm really hoping that you know, Games Workshop treats their intellectual property with the respect it deserves, because we have a lot of love for it because it's so unique, it's so vibrant, it's so unlike anything of its caliber, while, you know, maintaining a lot of the tropes of other things and bringing them together in a really cool way.
Yeah. I mean, and I definitely think they wanna, you know, at least with where they are now, they definitely wanna, you know, make the players happy in that regard, because this is their flagship game. Like,
it's their only thing that has legs. I'm willing to say, like, everything else, like, there's some fun fluffy stuff. Age of Sigmar is growing, but, like, 40k is the only thing that they really have, and I've been a little worried about, like, the way that they've been tossing their IP into the hands of questionable developers, especially in the game, like, you know, video games and other stuff too.
I mean, I'm sure it's being profitable for them in the short run, because they were having, you know, some profit issues a while back, and they did, you know, so they've started making more miniatures that people want to buy. They've started selling their IP more. I'm sure in some sense it's working in terms of making them money. I understand, the concern with, is this gonna, like, is some really stupid stuff gonna happen in the fluff and whatnot? I mean, with video games, you know, there have been some horrible video games made, I know, but people can just ignore those. Usually they're the lesser known ones anyway.
And it's not exactly like anything that happens in, like, the little iOS, like, little thing is gonna, like, that's gonna be the linchpin of the, you know, canon. No, they're not gonna do anything that ambitious.
Well, before we get into, because we were gonna get into the advancing plot line, but before we do, let's just get back to Fate of Konor. So, what do you think about the in regards to the you know, the Imperium winning and the fluff and kind of like how it was done? What do you think about that?
Well, I think that like I said before, that Games Workshop can't be faulted for doing their little fun, fluffy stuff. You know, I think that what you pointed out, I think you struck on a nerve when you said that they seem to have a short-term mindset, and you know, you can't fault someone for working with what's right in front of them, but, you know, I think that it is nice that they kept their word. It's nice that they worked off of the victories, and I think that it made it work. But unfortunately, I come out of Fate of Konor like it was a roller coaster. You know, like I got on expecting a good time. I got off having a good time. But at the end of it, does it advance the plot? I don't think that greatly. Especially with an Imperium win, it kind of just perpetuates the status quo. And we've seen a lot of, over the past decade, just this endless perpetual, you know, like, keep everything the same, and that is unsustainable.
Yeah, well, and the interesting thing is they are kind of bucking the status quo in terms of having, like, Primarchs come back and stuff.
Yeah.
But it's
really heavy-handed moves. It's really heavy-handed.
Yeah, it's very much like it's on our terms, you know. They did this Fate of Konor campaign, and that didn't really change the status quo. You know, the stuff that is changing the status quo is not stuff that players have had an influence in. It's just very it's very Games Workshop
arbitrary
doing stuff. And I mean, we can't really complain too much about the results of Fate of Konor though, because that was what the players, the Imperium won.
Right.
That was the players' result. So we can't be like, oh, they should just have Chaos win because that would mix things up a little, But
right, because that's what they said going into it. We're going to do this off of the results of the players, and I do respect that they kept to their word on that.
Yeah. So now just kind of, getting more into the advancing plot, right from that. One thing that I do kind of appreciate that they have done with the advancing timeline, because there's a lot of things that I'm not super keen on, but I do like that they've kind of made the Eye of Terror campaign results properly canon finally by saying Abaddon blew up Cadia, basically.
Yeah, that was huge. That was, I mean, when I came into 40K, originally, my friend was running Imperial Guard, and, 40K is such an outlandish, intense setting. It can be a little bewildering to a newer player, but I saw these little World War II soldiers holding the line, and I was like, "What are these?" And he's like, "These are they who put on a bullet suit and just looked down demons in the eyes and actually somehow come out on top most of the time."
Yep, the regular people fighting them all.
You gotta love a stormtrooper. You gotta love just the people that are willing to sit in the trenches. And Cadia in particular, it was incredible. I remember looking at an old map of the Eye of Terror, and you guys see this giant warp storm of just madness, and this tiny little sliver radiating from the center, and holding that little bulwark is Cadia. And perhaps it was doomed to fail from the beginning. And I'm not upset about Cadia falling. In fact, I think that it's a good thing. I just think that Games Workshop is advancing things in a really, really rapid way, and that's concerning a lot of people. Now, I like the Imperium, I like Xenos, I like Chaos. I'm just a big fan of the setting in general. So I'm not, no one's pissing in my coffee. But there are certainly some friends of mine online and, in person that are very concerned that their faction's going to get wiped out, that their faction's going to be different.
I'm raising my hand here. You can't see me, but I'm raising my hand. Just look at that video.
Your Slaanesh video?
The Slaanesh video.
Yeah.
Because I have a faction that I run that's Traitor Guardsmen and Demons, and it's Mono God Slaanesh.
Yeah. So let's hope that Sigmarines do not come and put 40K Slaanesh in a bag too.
It's not gonna be the Sigmarines. If it happens, it's gonna be the Inari, the new Eldar force. I'll admit I don't want that to happen for personal reasons. I kind of agree. I was actually happy about the whole Cadia getting nuked thing, just because, like I said, I have really fond memories of the Eye of Terror campaign. And then making the ending, finally properly canon instead of, Chaos won, but it didn't really matter for some reason,
That couldn't possibly make sense.
Them finally making the results of that campaign canon, and, there's still Cadians around. But finally making those results canon and, advancing the story that way, and, making Abaddon. I mean, they did retcon a bunch of things to make Abaddon look better, but making Abaddon less of a failure.
He needs it.
I felt like that was good. But a lot of the other changes they're making, I don't like. Now, the Inari, I'm pretty cool with. I don't want them to kill Slaanesh, but the whole, a new faction of Eldar, Dark Eldar, and, Craftworld Eldar and Harlequins all coming together to, try and save the Eldar race. I kind of like that. That's cool. And there've been hints of that, and that's been building in the fluff for a long time. Mm-hmm. What I'm not super keen on the Primaris Marines, just because Space Marines are already these, super soldier, superhuman guys, and like you said, when it's up to 11, how much can you go past that? And at some point, doesn't it seem a little childish and silly? We've got these giant super soldiers. Now we have even more super soldiers, which sounds like a 13-year-old escalating things.
If you want my 2 cents on the issue, Noel.
I like the models.
Yeah, well, that's actually exactly my point. Is I think that what Games Workshop was trying to do is they wanted to sell scale Space Marines on the tabletop, something that actually looked like a Space Marine should, and they've been flying off the shelves because, people want those awesome, indestructible super soldiers of the Emperor, but they are also, struggling to... Here's the thing about Games Workshop. They don't want to ever retcon. They never want to admit that they made a mistake. And if they do, then they just put it in a bag and they never talk about it. You know, they squat it. And, like...
Fair enough.
I sort of feel like, you know, Games Workshop is a powerhouse, you know, like after their humble beginnings up to like some questionable terrain in the recent history, coming to where they're coming out stronger now, I'd say. I think that they have earned the right to, you know, sort of admit when they've come up short. It would be better if they were to be more concise and just tell us with things as they really are. Like, the problem then is like, well, what do we do with all these Space Marine models that are no longer accurate? And it's like, well,
the smaller ones. Well, the thing is, if you look at like the past, they like go more thing. I just know there's something I guess they didn't want to do everything in press. So, like I said before, we had that strange technical error.
Yeah, we had a little bit of a power failure. The machine spirit has been appeased, and we are hoping that things will stay normal.
Yep. Jack put the consecrated oils on it.
Said a few prayers, threw some incense in the mix, and I think we're good.
Yeah. It did spark a little, but, you know, that's
expected, though.
That's showing that it's pleased.
Yes, it's grateful.
So what I was saying was, yeah, I think it would be cool if they made the 40K setting a little more like Warhammer Fantasy. In that Warhammer Fantasy, you could play things from different parts of the timeline. Mm-hmm. Like they had a character named Azog the Slaughterer who had been dead for like hundreds of years by the time of the present, you know, timeline in fantasy, you know, before the end of times, and he was a special character you could play in your game. There were a lot of these historical special characters you could play in your game. Some of them had the same war gear as later special characters too. You know, it was
interesting.
It was just like the timeline shuffle. You could play as a bunch of people from different time periods. You could play as specific armies. Like you could play as the dwarf army from back in the War of the War
of the Beard.
The War of the Beard. Yep. You could play from back in then when they had more primitive technology, but they also had access to, you know, they had more access to some of the troops that are rarer now. Things like that. I think it would be cool if 40K did that too.
Right.
And we could play things like, you know, like the Makarian Crusade.
It would be cool to see that happen. You know, like I was saying before we got interrupted, the timeline has to be advanced, and I don't know if a jump would be better than just like, you know, doing it painstakingly bit by bit. Because, you know, as it stands right now, a lot of people are in anguish. A lot of people are worried that, like, you know, especially, you know, on Chaos's end and the Imperium, the two big players, I think, are really worried that one's going to trump out over the other.
I don't think they're going to blow up the universe like Age of Sigmar.
They couldn't. Like, if they did, then that would be like, you know, the biggest middle finger like anyone could ever give to anyone, and they're not going to do that. They can't. I think what they're going to have to do, they're going to have to preserve 40K as a setting. Like they run 30K tournaments because it's just a different game. It's a different setting, and it has a lot of player base. They're going to keep doing that for 40K, and, you know, I would like to take some time to, like, you know, speculate about what 50K or 4.5 or 4.1, whatever we're going to call it, is going to look like.
Yeah, for sure. And I think another thing, just as far as them not Age of Sigmar in 40K, is from a real world business perspective, you got to look at it. Warhammer Fantasy was having struggling sales.
5% of their income.
So they decided to drastically mix things up. 40K is their flagship.
95% of their income.
so very different situation there. So I think if they have any sense, they're not going to do that. Yeah, I do agree with you that I don't know if they're going to skip forward. Maybe they will. If they do, regardless, I think no matter what happens, we're going to get like a really big event here. Mm-hmm. You know, like you know, something a lot bigger than Age of Konor before it skips forward. If they do skip forward, you know, and even if they don't skip forward, we're going to get that big event, I think.
If I may tenebrously suggest my theory, I already talked this over with Noel. I believe that's why I'm sitting in this chair right now. It's because I have a good idea, and I totally want to get on his little soapbox for a minute and just spout my little piece of heresy.
Do it.
I think that the Imperium is going to fall, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Now, this is coming from someone who loves the Imperium. I think it's so cool. It's neat. It's got many different facets, and that's why I don't think it's going to be a bad thing.
Yeah. Now, you should specify what you mean by fall, because you don't mean that, like, all the armies of the Imperium are going to be gone.
Right. Say goodbye to your Ultramarines. They're finally going to go in the bag of non-existence where they can beat up Malal.
Get squatted, I'm sure.
No, that's not going to happen. Okay, so if we were to look at a real-world comparison for the Imperium of Man, I think it's obvious, especially like I just mentioned, the Ultramarines take a huge part of this motif. The closest thing that we have in comparison is probably the Empire of Rome. Historically, that's among the larger, civilizations that ever happened. It was hugely advancing in technology, and it fell. But Rome, as an organization, didn't fall for a long time. A lot of people don't know this, but the Constantine Empire,
the Byzantine,
the Byzantine Empire that was in Constantinople. That's actually Rome. It's
they called it Rome back then.
They lost Rome though, so historians were like, "Well, we can't call it the Roman Empire if Rome's not in it."
We have to distinguish,
right? But Rome itself lasted way longer than the Roman Empire did, and conversely, the Roman Empire lasted a lot longer than when it was named the Roman Empire. So I think that similarly, that's going to happen with the Imperium. I have to call it like I see it. The Maledictum has literally ripped the Imperium in half. We're already seeing some interesting stuff coming out in the teaser photos for the new Rhino with right now we have the double-headed Aquila, simplifying, humanity's unity, strength, and power, authority, good old-fashioned symbol. Right now, though, the Aquila is cut in half on those pictures.
That is interesting, because I did not notice that.
Yes,
but
it is. There's a gap between it.
If they actually are thinking the same thing you are, points for symbolism.
I mean, seriously though, that is huge. And someone like when you're dealing with a world like 40K where no amount of detail is too much. Like, we know how a lasgun shoots. I mean, we're pretty sure that every little bit has been thought out. This is an important symbol, and I think that it's going to show that already the Imperium is starting to have trouble coming to grips with how on earth it's supposed to maintain united when literally a warp storm is running down the middle of it. It's going to result... I have some friends who are punting the ball around. They think it might lead to civil war. I don't know. I think humanity is too desperate to really turn on itself, but scarier things have happened in the past.
And this is kind of what we were talking about we might like to see. It's just we were kind of using a hive fleet instead of a warp storm as something that could be a force great enough to cause the Imperium to fracture. Of course, and we've got Guilliman there is going to be one of the people who picks up the pieces very obviously.
Who will obviously be at the head of the Imperium as it is able to maintain control of what it is. Guilliman will probably rule as emperor in acting emperor,
Well, and there is kind of the question I think of, is it going to be sort of an Ultramar thing that's kind of nominally attached to the the Imperium proper with the High Lords of Terra still in charge?
They're not going to like Guilliman stepping on their toes, that's for certain.
Yeah. Is that going to become a split itself? There's a lot of things that could happen.
When Rome lost control of its territory, it wasn't an easy break. It wasn't Rome proper stayed together and then this other faction took over the other 50%. That was not how it went down. There were lots of schisms, lots of splits. Germany claimed to be Rome for hundreds of years, and it
Holy
had
Roman Empire.
No legitimate claim to it at all, other than it wanted to be Rome. I think we're going to see a similar thing happen in the Imperium, and I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think that it opens up the door for some really interesting, human v human stuff. I think that, again, they're going to have to tone down the power scale a little bit. I think maybe some of the doomsday stuff's going to go off on each other, and some of the enemies of humanity end up wiping each other out to a point where it's manageable again.
Not completely.
Exactly. No one's getting bagged, I don't think. But, it's going to sort of be space enough not to go noble bright, because they're not going to do that, but I think to create some interesting dynamics where we see
something just different.
Yeah, and
is the key.
And again, that might actually be a quality of life boon in most Manufactorum planets and stuff. If leadership was a little bit more localized, that might actually be a good thing. Who knows?
I'm sure it'd be downsides too. It would be a mixed bag. I don't know if they're going to do that. I would actually like it if they did that, because for starters, it's a great excuse to have now you have a lot more richer story reasons for Imperium versus Imperium armies.
Oh, and wouldn't you love to see it? Wouldn't you love to see the Salamanders tearing the Marines Malevolent, be like, guess what? I don't need permission now.
Well, yeah, the thing is, like, we see that on the tabletop, but, you know, in the fluff, it's always, oh, it was like a misunderstanding, or one side was just being really stupid. It's not a lot of compelling motivations for the Imperium versus Imperium conflicts.
Plus, if Rome, in quotation marks, falls, we got to see some really interesting stuff with the Vatican. Like, you know what I mean? We got to see the...
Well, that's Terra, yeah, right?
Yeah, we got to see the ecclesiarchy really start to flex its muscles. Perhaps the Inquisition throws in with them, and, like, they police everyone else and make sure everyone plays nice. We got to see some small gains against each other. Like, I think not everything has to be end of the world to tell an interesting story, and that's why I'm excited about the plot moving forward. Now, as long as the plot is moving 40K forward as a setting, I'm worried. But if Games Workshop has the, you know, the manhood to, you know, to step up and actually, you know, create a new setting, that opens the door for a lot of fun stuff. And even, like, you know, we could talk about how it got from point A to point B. That's an interesting story too.
And then you have the potential too. It's like, you know, you were mentioning, what's the Inquisition gonna do? What's, you know, like the Inquisition, the Sisters of Battle, these groups that police the rest of the Imperium. You could also look at the potential of them, if they decide it's not worth it. They may decide to become a more like neutral factions between parties, and, like, as long as you're worshiping the Emperor, and not, you know, chaos and whatever. Again, kind of very much like the schism between nations when Rome fell and stuff. As long as you're worshiping the Emperor, we're gonna, like, kind of police you and stuff. But as long as you're doing that, we're not gonna take a side.
I mean, Space Rome is cool, but, like, don't you want to see Space Britain?
I mean, space medieval Europe. That's what we're talking about here.
Yeah, wouldn't that be great? I don't know. I just think there's already a lot of strong motifs like that in 40K, and to see those flourish, like, wouldn't it be interesting to see, like, the successor chapters, who comes together, who doesn't? What are Dark Angels going to do? Are they going to be some weird shadow powerhouse that runs between everyone?
Probably.
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, like, there's no question about that. But what I'm trying to say is there's some really interesting stuff once we're allowed to ease up off that e-brake that's on the story right now. And that's why the grinding's happening, the screeching, the sparks. It's because we're all pulling that e-brake as hard as we can. If we can just let go of that, preserve 40K as a setting, let it stand, let it be cool, let us all remember that climactic period of humanity's history, but we come out on the other side scathed but okay, divided but not defeated. That opens up for a new interesting story in this very unique world that I personally really want to see, because I just want to know where the chips fall.
Yeah, I like it thematically, what you're talking about, because, you know, 40K always has taken heavy historical influence, and like you said, Rome is a huge influence. I think medieval Europe is something that would be equally fitting for a historical influence for the setting. So I like this. Like I said, I don't know if that's what Games Workshop is going to do, but if they do that, I like that direction better than some of the other directions they could take.
And, you know, there's all these interesting stories about 30K, you know, like, I forget the name of that one hive world. They're making a board game out of it now.
Necromunda?
Necromunda, yeah. So when they found Necromunda, it was within striking distance of Terra and wasn't part of the Imperium. And Necromunda's leadership structure, they had their own little mini Imperium with, like, you know, little worlds and stuff, because they had the means of production. And they had the balls to actually say to the Emperor, hey, why don't you give us a tithe and we'll call it good. They had no idea who they were up against.
That didn't end well, I'm
sure. No, Necromunda's never bounced back. But what I'm trying to say is, you know, these interesting things that we see about, like, you know, the Imperium swelling and these interesting human-on-human power plays. It'll be cool to see more of that as the Imperium tries to hold itself together and eventually does schism. But the bonds of brotherhood between Astartes, I don't think are ever going to go away.
Well, some chapters hate each other. You mentioned
true.
Salamanders and Marines Malevolent.
That's true.
I think you very easily could see some some chapters taking sides in a split.
Similarly, though, there will be some that will always respect one another and will be there even if like political boundaries are drawn differently. It'll be interesting to see perhaps the Astartes become their own little powerhouses. Perhaps different governments spring up. Who knows?
Yeah, a lot of story potential. That's the reason I think this is a great idea. Games Workshop, if you're listening,
please.
Great idea. Lots of story potential here.
I will buy your new models. I will. I just want to see something cool happen, and I don't want it to be like, I don't want it to go up to 12, then to 13, then to 14. Can we dial it back down to 7 and tell interesting stories again that can spike up to 10?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. There's some precedent for it in the setting too. I told you a while back. It's almost like a bit of an obscure piece of lore about the Nova Terra Internum, which is where the entire Segmentum Pacificus, so like a quarter of the Imperium, for 900 years was separate from the Imperium. And the Imperium's only been around like 10,000 years, right?
Yeah.
So like for a tenth of that time, a quarter of the Imperium was just its own thing. Which is hardly touched on in the fluff, even though it seems like it would be a huge deal. So it's not like I think there's some naysayers that are going to be like, oh, if the Imperium fractured, it would be wiped out. You know, I don't think that's necessarily the case.
You know, don't listen to the Nids. Don't listen to the Orcs. Don't listen to anyone. Don't listen to those Tau who say their coffee machines are better than ours. You know what I'm saying? Humanity is a lot more resilient than anything else.
Tau coffee machines are the way to heresy and damnation.
Thank you, Inquisitor Nolan.
I shouldn't be saying that. I'm a chaos heretic, but even chaos, we don't necessarily like Xenos scum either. So,
but the truth of the matter is that I think that one of the most beautiful things about 40K as a setting is it really shows off the resilience of humanity. And like, if you let us live, we'll bounce back. That's one of our special things, and I don't think it has to be the end of the world. I do think that some rather cataclysmic things have to happen to the enemies of humanity. Like I think that maybe Nids and Chaos get in a fight, and an Orc Wog or two gets in the mix. Like, I've heard it said that 40K is funny because so many doomsday devices are going off at the same time that they cancel each other out. Well, I'd like to actually see that represented in canon. I think it would be hilarious, even if perhaps a little anticlimactic. We can make it a little cooler, where maybe they get to the footsteps of Terra or something else. But like, we come out of it because evil ended up fighting itself a little bit, and again, we come out scathed, defeated, but also alive.
And it's true, you don't see that too much in like it's mentioned that it's a thing that happens, but you don't really see it too much in like big events in the fluff. I mean, I can think of like the time the Dark Elders are like rescued a craft world, but that's not really like evil versus evil because you got good in the mix there.
Right.
And the Dark Eldar aren't really one of the huge forces that you think of when you think of like galaxy destroying doomsday stuff.
They're gross, but they're not like the big bads. No.
Yeah, I think that would be a great idea. I think there's established precedent for it. A lot of story potential there. I think regardless of what they do, we are going to get to the big event. We're going to get the Fate of Konor on steroids.
Something has to give.
Eye of Terror scale.
Games Workshop is really cool that they've created this setting where like a universe-ending event for any other universe would be like a Friday evening. You know what I mean? Like, it just happens every day like clockwork. But unfortunately, the reality is that any seasoned veteran of lore, anyone who's actually dug their teeth into the books and to the movies and to every source of medium that we have out there, will tell you that it's not only war, no matter what the box and books say.
That just sounds cool.
It's a good marketing campaign, but it's not the reality of the situation. The truth of the situation is there's just a lot of people who are just trying to get by and do their best, and like, we can't keep staying at 11, like I think we've touched on a couple of times. Like, we've built a house of cards and we're putting books on top of it. Like,
yeah, when you're always at 11, being at 11 isn't very meaningful. when it's always like, when you amp it up too much, it becomes the tension goes.
You ever hear a bass boosted meme before?
Yeah, I actually haven't. No,
but they're terrible. Like, okay. You can't hear anything.
Okay, yeah, but yeah, you have to have those kind of quieter, the calm before the storm, the quieter moments that's how you have true tension. You look at a thriller or a horror movie or whatever, there's always the quieter moments where they're walking through the dark. It's not just constant monsters jumping out, then people get tired of it and it seems silly instead of scary.
Right, and unfortunately that has been the plague of 40K. I think people looking from the outside in say this looks silly. It's hard for them to wrap their heads around it first. You kind of have to learn the language of 40K.
Silliness is okay when it's done right, you know, when some of those like references to other fictional things, the orcs, you know, doing ridiculous things.
Well, no one's going to hate on the orcs.
Yeah, you don't want to be silly when you're trying to be super serious, though.
Yeah, and I think that like we've said before, something has to give. This story is getting too heavy-handed. Yinyids come back to life. If you know anything about Eldar, that means that either he's dying and the Eldar race is going in the bag, or Slaanesh is. It's coming to a head, and like maybe there could be some sort of they trade blows and then they can build themselves back up, but something huge is going to happen. And again, like with the Imperium being beset by all sides, in the latest what is it, a Rising Dawn, like this newest book series?
Oh gosh, I don't remember.
Well, in the nearest book series where Gulaman comes back and Yinyin is born, they hint in a paragraph that there's a Gene Stealer cult on Terra. You know, just put it there.
Oh, I remember. I didn't remember the book name, but I do remember that.
Yeah, like that. I mean, sure, don't tell us what's going on with that, but you know what I mean. Like something has to give. There's too much going on in too many important places. Something will change. But what I would counsel anyone who is like me and loves this series, just remember it can be a good thing. It can be something that we use to tell newer and interesting stories, and no one's going to take your 40K models and throw them into a fire. Games Workshop is too smart for that. In fact, them being able to loosen up on the pressing need to advance the story, because that's what we're making demands for them to do, actually gives them a lot of license to go back into 40K, tune it up as a setting, maybe finally be able to retcon some stuff out since their newer flagship is doing its own thing now, and we can maybe work out some of the lore kinks in 40K, open up some interesting, you know, crusades and stories that happened in that timeline that are no longer having to add on to the House of Cards, if you know what I'm saying.
I would love like an Abyssal Crusade source book.
It'd be amazing. There's it's freeing, really. It's letting the hand slip out of the shackles. If they're willing to let it resolve, then they can go back and tune it up better.
Yeah. Well, I think we've pretty thoroughly covered it, and we're gonna just kind of repeat ourselves too much if we keep going. But yeah, good stuff. So that's our thoughts. If you have any thoughts about the Advancing Timeline or the Fate of Konor campaign, share them in the comments. And yeah, we hope you enjoyed. Have a good day.
Thank you so much for your time, and take care.
Yep. Bye-bye.